The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone who is attending this webinar as part of the Global Platform for Sustainable Cities project. As a partnering project between ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, the World Resources Institute, C40 Cities, and the GEF. Today's webinar will center in the latest addition and recommendations for compiling greenhouse gases inventories for cities using the latest guidelines and frameworks, which are currently available. We will make a small overview on what is currently being used at the international level, some frameworks for comparison against other frameworks and guidelines which are available at regional and at country level, and what is recommended at city level from the perspective from ICLEI as a city, as the leading city network in the world. My name is Cesar Carreño. I am a senior officer for low carbon cities at ICLEI World Secretariat. We are based in Bonn, Germany, and we are a key player in the Global Platform for Sustainable Cities project. We are very happy to have you here. We have a very nice attendance, and we hope to make the best out of this short webinar. The webinar will last 60 minutes. We will dedicate 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes to explain and expand the concepts, and the last 10 or 15 minutes for questions that you might have. It is important to highlight that this webinar is addressed to practitioners that have just started and other type of practitioners that wish to have further information regarding the particular standard that we recommend. We would like to see what has been the natural and logical evolution towards setting a global framework for reporting for cities, which allows comparability at the international level for data aggregation and consolidation. So welcome, and let's begin. So these are the topics that we are going to cover. What are the GHG emission inventories used for? What are the main advantages of a GHG inventory? How regularly should these inventories be compiled? Which type of quality control needs to be addressed for the inventories? Which guidelines and frameworks are mostly recommended and used at the international level, and why? What's next? What awaits for the practitioners in this scope, this sector, this scenario within the next years? So it is important to address what is the current situation at urban level. At this point, according to latest report, around 70% of the world population will live in urban areas by 2050. The United Nations has stated that around 68% will live in urban or heavily populated areas by 2050. As of today, 55% of the world lives in urban areas, and this will increase within the next years. No, so why is this important to highlight? Because this increase could add around 2.5 billion people to urban areas. And this, of course, increases the demand on services, materials, products, transportation, the demand for sanitation, water, energy services, so forth and so on. So by 2018, the revision of the World Urbanization Prospects, which was produced by the Population Division of the UN Department of Economics and Social Affairs, of course, highlighted that the concentration will be highly increased in many few countries. No, India, China, Nigeria, they are roughly concentrating around 30-35% of the population of the increase of this projected growth. No, between 2018 and 2050. So according to this, India is expected to add around 500 urban dwellers, China 250 million, and Nigeria around 200 million. So the rate of urban growth, the urban population, has gone from the mid 50s, from around 800 million people to almost 4 billion people in 2018. So it is important to address this current situation, and we need to be prepared, establishing systems of data management that would allow us to identify the main flows of the city, the material flows of the city, the energy flows of the city. We should start to develop the control strategy that we are going to take for this particular situation regarding the measurement of GHG emissions. So how does the local governments benefit from putting in place a project for GHG emission inventories? So normally what they will do, they can identify the key emissions categories and sources within the jurisdiction, which ideally repeats in all cities. No, it could be that some cities might not have the same sectors. For instance, a heavily industrialized city will not compare to a mid-sized city in a different part of the country where the industry is not as prominent as it should be. No, so but there are several sectors which repeat throughout all of the cities. One of them is the provision of energy in the form of either electricity or transportation. And as well, of course, the management of solid waste. Of course, establishing the foundation for developing GHG mitigation strategies and GHG reduction targets while obtaining international financing for cities that require this particular point. No? All of the mitigation strategies needs to be delivered after the measurement of emissions per sector, per scope, per type of gas, per region, if it's as for geographical scope. And of course, the reduction targets that are 100% aligned to these mitigation strategies. No? Establishing the foundation for tracking progress toward reducing emissions and meeting with GHG reduction targets, of course, this is the part where monitoring it's involved. And providing a consistent framework for comparison against GHG emission inventories and mitigation efforts from other jurisdictions, including national governments and GHG emission inventories. Of course, this will provide some sort of alignment at international levels to see that cities are working towards the same goal, using the same tools, and we are adding apples to apples and pears to pears, and not the contrary, apples to pears, which makes the quantification and the consolidation of data much more complicated than it should be. So what else do the local leaders use emission inventories for? Well, normally they can do some scientific research as well, like modeling the emissions, find the sources of pollution because it's directly linked to the air quality, to urban health, to find links between pollution and environment, to find the links between pollution and health, and of course, finding solutions for these particular points. And of course, this can be as well reflected in the development of targeted policies. No, in policy making, of course, they can develop cost-effective policies, and they can understand their hotspots, understand what are the vulnerable sectors. They can monitor progress. They can set and define targets and goals for GHG mitigation. And of course, they dedicate sectorial targets as well if they wish to do so. For socialization, which of course includes the communication with the stakeholders, the citizens, the private sector, the public sector, the international sector, so forth and so on. And of course, the alignment with national governments, which is very important because, as we all know, we have the NDCs put in place, and we are all aiming to reduce our emission on the -1.5 pathway. So, first of all, the local leaders need to define where is their boundary. Within this context, they can define the volume of data and how the policies are applied. You have the emissions of a territory, of course, and then you need to define which small sector of these emissions are ours. You can, of course, delimit your emissions based on a geographical scope or an administrative boundary. As you can see here, this short figure that I have shared with you shows the emissions of a public authority and whole territory from from a document which was published here in Europe in 2009. I will add a couple more of graphics for you, which we will make it much more simpler to understand this whole concept. No. Let's take, for instance, the identification of flows and materials, services that the city demands. And the urban system boundaries, as we can see here, shows the inflows and the outflows, how the internal flows communicate with each other, storage, production, biomass, minerals, water, and energy. So this is something that is shown here in let's call it a layman's graphic, which simplifies in reality how the flows with a city work. Of course, this to the expert eye can be easily understood, but let's say that you want to communicate this to your citizens, it will become much more difficult if the population is not informed in regards to this particular topic. Let's see another graphic that could represent this even better. Here we can see how the cities define their boundaries, how they have identified the main sectors that they would like to target regarding their projects. And here we can see how there are transboundary flows that comes from one city, from one region to another, and they are harder and harder to disaggregate, hence affecting the final result of our inventory. That's why it is highly important to have a properly defined boundary, either administrative or geographical boundary. As you can see here, the transboundary flows, they don't only end with City 2 and City 3, as we see here, but City 2 and City 3 have their own transboundary flows with City 4 and N numbers of cities. No? So this can be replicated either at national, subnational, regional, and global level. So the inventory can become infinite, but you need to define what are your particular interests and if you have or not a decision point on several of the strategies for demand of energy, services, and material. We can also use a GHG inventory in order to define certain metrics that can guide the development of policies at national level. As we can see here, an example, we see how there are low energy pathway cities and high energy pathway cities in China. Some cities may vary depending if they have strong service industries and coastal moderate climes. As you can see there, the per capita energy consumption is much more lower, but if they have energy intensive industries and cool climate, the demand of energy becomes higher and higher. No? But this is also led to what is available for them, and it has a direct impact in the financial sectors. As we can see here, the per capita gross regional product is higher in cities which have a little bit less of demand on energy consumption. But how long does it take to develop an inventory? From this graphic that we can see here, which is one of the documents that I will recommend at the end of this webinar, which is the inventory resources for some national governments, we can see how many hours does it take to develop an inventory on average. This is based on the use of one particular protocol that I will mention later on for basic scope, which includes stationary energy transfer and waste, which basic methods of calculation, which means emission factors. The estimated time is between 100 and 200 hours. This includes the whole process, which includes external review for external verifiers or external revision, if you wish. If you want to do a basic scope, which includes the same sectors, but with much more sophisticated methods for calculation, it can take a little bit longer, between 200 and 400 hours. If you want to do a very comprehensive scope, which includes other sectors like agriculture and forestry, which basic methods for emission factors between 300 and 600 hours, and the same, as we can see in the fourth point, that could take a little bit less than 1,000 hours. So this is something that we should take into account. Normally, most of the time, what it takes to gather the data it takes a big chunk of our time, no? Just to gather the data, to do the actual calculation and to work with the data. It doesn't take as long as expected. But if we see here, for instance, external review or stakeholder engagement takes 10% of this. So easily a basic scope inventory could take 20 hours only for review. So what are the GHG inventories, the GHG emission inventories used for that we can add on top of what has already been mentioned, where potential measures to address particular sources of emissions, the co-benefits for reduction, the creation of jobs, the increase of urban health, criteria for pollutant reductions for particular matter, staffing requirements for reducing this source, which has a direct impact on the planning for financial resources, the cost per ton reduction, and the cost of measure minus the cost of savings of over time, which we in exchange will turn our way of work much more efficient. No, potential barriers for reduction if we need to add for foreign help or for collaboration of the national government, ease of integration into existing policies. How can we uh, connect the gears of national and subnational policy, and how does it fit with existing costs and plans? No, of course we can define short, middle, and long-term benefits, and of course possible sources of funding, which could be from the utility, states, federal, or others at the international level. Again, why it is important? Because we need, of course, to align with the national commitment. According to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, all parties need to take into account their common but differentiated responsibility. That means countries at national level. And they need to develop and update, polish, and make available for the conference of the parties national inventories of anthropogenic emissions, defining sources and removals, but using comparable methodologies. Why is this important? Because it will allow us to do data aggregation and consolidation in a very ecological way, enhancing transparency for the international community. Now, in regards to this, it is important to highlight that even this has been signaled as a very important component. We have seen that regions or countries are creating their own standards which are compatible with this, global framework idea. But at some point, they offer limitations and constraints when you want to do comparison at regional level, or for initiatives, or at city level, or at subnational level, even for states or provinces. So how regularly should the inventories be compiled? Well, as we all know, in statistics, 1 point is just a dot and 2 points are a line, but 3 points become a trend. So ideally, each inventory needs to be compiled as regularly as possible, because from 2 points you might be able to tell that there is a trend. Let's say it's a upwards trend, but you cannot tell the nature of that trend. It's linear, exponential, it oscillates. So you need more information than needed, no? So normally the third point provides a lot of information because it has more information than any other point on the trend. If you have only 2 points, it's very difficult to assess. With more than 2 points, of course, the third point is the one that will be the game changer. So that's why all of these regulations encourage and leverage subnational governments to do the inventories as regularly as possible. But this changes on how available are the financial and technical resources of the cities to actually compile the inventory. It is highly recommended to publish inventories every year. Why? Because it provides more information, and normally the data is fresh, and the team is also fresh from working every year. So you are enhancing and reproducing new methodologies. And of course, you can follow up the path towards the target which has been settled in advance. some cities, they normally aligned to the national regulation on publishing periods. It could be 5 years, depending on the commitment that the country has been done. Normally for the NDC, it should be every 5 years. Um, and there are other cases in which cities are more ambitious than the national counterparts. For instance, the national is every 5 years, and at city level, they do it every year. This also changes with the use of data. At country level, the country level use the fifth assessment report. The country level uses the third assessment report, and the city level, they would like to use the fifth assessment report, or maybe some other countries would like to use the fifth assessment report, including carbon climate feedback, which is a very much more advanced perspective. So that shows how committed the cities are, and of course, all of them have a good reasoning to do so. No? So one of these is a good example is New York City. We have seen that they are best practice case studies with yearly publications of GG inventories from the research that we have done. New York City is part of the C40 network, C40 cities, and we are aware that they are, of course, reproducing a lot of very useful and insightful work. As we can see here, they have been fulfilling their requirements, and of course, trying to be as precise and of course, as accurate as possible with the publishing of their inventories, which are publicly available. And of course, there are best practice case studies that we highly recommend. If you have the time, please do a quick internet search, and you can see how they have been working in a steady way, and of course, aligned to one particular international protocol that they have decided is the one that aligns the best with the city's sources, flows, activities, and the lifestyle of the city itself. No. In exchange, Rio de Janeiro complies inventories every 2 years. This is local policy. It doesn't have to be like this for each city or each country, but you need to find a way to have it as regularly as possible. No. Now, whenever you have your own inventory, you need to define, or you need to set what will be your quality control system. Why? Because the GC inventory needs to be credible, it needs to be transparent, it needs to be believable, and normally you cannot say this on your own. You need a third party to support this claim against international authorities and organizations. And normally this can be done through either an initiative or an accredited organization. For instance, you can always go to all of the designated operational entities that were assigned by the Kyoto flexible mechanisms for CDM or for joint implementation. Normally they can do certification using standards like the ISO. And you can, of course, go to international initiatives such as the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, which also provides a light review on inventories developed using the protocol. The quality and credibility of the GH inventories depends on the integrity of the methodologies used, of course. This means that the report needs to be complete. You need to provide your full data set, which includes emission factors, activity data, the methodology that has been used for each particular sector and subsector. And if you want to do an actual verification, you need to provide the sources and legal documentation that, of course, can back up all of the statements that the city has been doing throughout the whole process. And what was the procedure for compilation of data? So this, of course, on behalf of transparency. So the most documented you have your data, the most transparent the inventory would be. In order to promote the development of high quality and credible national greenhouse inventories, all of these methods, actions, and procedures have been defined in the IPCC guidelines, and they are referred as good practice. So the IPCC's 1996 guidelines are publicly available. If you wish to refer to them, you can, of course, do a quick internet search, and you will find the methodologies or you can as well contact us. We also have them. This, of course, has achieved general acceptance amongst countries as the basis for development of credible inventories. So how do you decide that you will compile an inventory? You need to define which emission sources you are going to measure. What would you like to measure? No? For instance, each city say, okay, I believe that I think I know for sure that transportation is one of the key sectors of my emissions. So hence, I'm going to measure this. Or maybe it's the generation of stationary energy, or maybe it's waste. So it depends on what is the main activity of your city and what are the demands of your city in certain topics. No? You can also define what emissions you wish to disregard. It could happen that because of national regulation, all of the premises or all of the installations of projects which are under the emission trading scheme are disregarded of the inventory of the city because these are included under X or Y program at national or international level. You can also disregard facilities which are part of the geographical boundaries of your city, but they are under the administration of a different city that wish to include this inventory in their this data in their inventories. Of course, there needs to be some sort of information that will the verifier or the reviewer let us know what is happening here. No, so you need to have this in advance. Now, for the quality control, you need to develop MRV framework. The MRV is monitoring, reporting, verification, which should include, of course, several sources of comparison with independent methods broadly indicated the correctness of methods. If there is any uncertainty, which there always is uncertainty, but the lower it is, the better. Of course, it needs to be independent and for estimation, for comparison. It needs to estimate uncertainties to give idea of the reliability. And of course, it needs to have a completeness check in place. I'm sharing here a graphic from a document from the World Resources Institute. All of the sources are included here, which showcase how all of the types of measurement, reporting, and verification for mitigation are delivered, taken, and established based on which type of data are we accounting. No? So we have emissions here, which is what are we emitting. For mitigation, actually, we take into account the reductions. And of course, for support, we need to link this to other indicators such as financial indicators. No? For instance, the one that we are mentioning now is the first one, emissions. This MRV graphic accounts only for national level, but it can also be adapted at subnational level if needed. The total GHG emissions at national level needs to be accounted for. The emissions at organizational level and facility level, this means projects or small facilities for energy generation. In this case, if we want to adapt this MRV system into subnational level, we will, of course, model it following the total GHG emissions at national level. Why? Because a country normally behaves a little bit differently than cities. So what guidelines are recommended and why? So an effective standard or protocol for the urban GHG inventories needs to assess the following points: the list of gases to be measured, the emission sources to be included, the definition of sectors, the measurement of scopes, the values of climate change potential for non-CO2 gases, tiers or accuracy of emission factors. So, I mean, it needs to allow a way of ranking how accurate or how trustful our data is. The description of methodology, and of course the data quality assessment that I mentioned before. No? So what we are observing here, that of course it does not mean that these are not included in all of the protocols that we will give a light touch here, but each of them have certain advantages and others don't have. No, so we will make a short comparison and there you will see how this is properly reflected or no within the framework of these particular protocols and guidelines. So what do we have available at the moment? A couple of examples here. We have the IPCC guidelines for national GHG inventories, which can be downscaled as of national level. The International Local Government GHG Emissions Analysis Protocol, which was developed by ICLE in 2009. The International Standards for Determining Greenhouse Gas Emission Cities, which was developed by the UNEP, UN Habitat, and the World Bank in 2010. The Emissions Inventory and Monitoring Emissions Inventory Methodology by the Covenant of Mayors Initiative, the US Community Protocol, was developed by ICLE USA, past 2070. Just a couple of examples here that we can see that there is a wide variety of protocols, guidelines, frameworks to follow up. No. Here we can observe Ilan Carbon, which was developed by France and is widely used at city level in France with much success. PS 2070 by the UK. And of course, the Global Protocol for Community Scale Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory developed in conjunction with C40WRI and ICLE. Now, how do they compare to each other? Let's see. Now here we have the protocols and guidelines that I mentioned before. Here we can see that each of them have slight variations with each other. No, each of them borrow and take from the previous one and fine tune the framework according to the needs of their region, their city, or whatever the needs they see to acknowledge from particular urban centers. No. So some of them provide guidelines like, yes, you need to use these particular emission factors, these particular sources for activity data, and some of them are quite free to use for. No? For instance, for ICLE US, they used to provide specific data sources, calculation approaches, and reporting frameworks. For the Covenant of Mayors Initiative, which use the BEI and the MEI, which is the Baseline Emission Inventories and Monitoring Emissions Inventory Methodology. It measures CO2 emissions resulting from non-UE emission trading scheme. That means that all of the facilities which are under the umbrella of the emission trading scheme were not supposed to be included, but were also mentioned only for transparency. But for instance, one difference was that in the European Covenant of Mayors, the measurement of waste was optional, while in others was included as mandatory. For the BSI, the PS 2070 measures emissions using a direct supply chain and consumption-based approach, and so forth and so on. No? So each of them borrowed from the other and started to fine-tune the methodologies, to fine-tune the requirements, to have a much more robust framework for reporting. Here we can also see the Global Protocol for Community Scale, the GPC, which is the one that I'm going to mention later on, which of course offers a detailed and urban adapt inventory, which includes all sectors and subsectors relevant to cities and activities. But not only that, includes more gases. I will show this now. So here's another comparison, but what it is included, what it is not included with several frameworks and standards and guidelines. Within the consistency with major IPCC emission source categories, the GPC offers this type of consistency, others not so much. We also have the adoption of scope framework, scope meaning how to identify the geographical, the emission per source, if it's included in the geographical boundary, a boundary of its energy which is demanded from outside, from grid supply. So the adoption of scope is included under the GPC. In others, not that much. Others use a principle called direct indirect emissions, which is something similar but not quite. Of course, the inclusion of boundaries is included in all of them. It's quite logical. But the inclusion of out of boundaries emissions are not included in all of them. Some of them include some, and some of them they don't include it at all. They're only taking into account what is generated on site. So how many gases are included in the GPC? 7. The IPCC also includes 7, so they are fully aligned. The International Emissions Accounting Protocol included only 6, and other protocols like BEI, MEI included CO2 only, and other gases were rather optional. Bilan carbon, for instance, includes all of the Kyoto gases and vapor for planes, and the Japanese standard includes only CO2, CH4, and nitrous oxide, which is N2O. So what we are looking here is that if we want to align our subnational inventory to the national framework, which is based on the IPCC guidelines, and we want to include the 7 gases, of course, we have one major candidate at this point. So what are the guidelines and frameworks protocols that we recommend at ICLEI, local governments for sustainability? We, of course, lobby for the use of the GPC. Why? Because the GPC is fully aligned with the IPCC sectors, although you can see here that the IPCC sector represents energy as a whole, while the GPC split this between stationary energy sources and transportation. Why? Because cities behave like this. They have these particular sectors and subsectors. Stationary energy, meaning buildings, facilities, installations, premises, and transportation, of course, cars, trains, boats, whatever it is included within the flow of people inside our city. IPPU, of course, which is included in both, and waste included in both, and a follow included in both. Now, within the international alignment, the GPC, the Global Protocol for Community-Scale Greenhouse Gas Emission Inventories, was one of the mandatory. It's the mandatory protocol demanded by cities which are signatories of the Compact of Mayors. I'm going to explain later on what was the evolution of this. The Costa Rican national methodology for measurement of greenhouse gases is 100% fully aligned with the GPC. They actually base their methodology using the GPC. I'm going to show this in a minute. Currently, the Korean Environmental Corporation, which developed a tool for developing inventories at city level, using the IPCC methodology downscaled for cities, are offering the option of cities to develop the inventory either in the IPCC methodology or the GPC methodology with the same data that has been submitted to the tool. So it's more and more starting to unravel at an international level. Several tools are available both on and offline. You have ClearPath, which was developed by ICLEI US. You have Series, which was developed by C40. And we have seen with much success how cities and organizations and national networks are developing their own tools. We have an example from Argentina, the National Network of Municipalities. They developed their own GPC tool. Udalsarea, which is the network of cities of the Basque Country in Spain, they have developed their own GPC tool. In Australia as well, they have their own Excel GPC tool, although some cities prefer to work with Series as well. But we are seeing that cities are adapting more and more to this, no? And it's highly influential on the new reporting framework for the Global Covenant of Measures for Climate and Energy, which is was published this year. That means that this particular framework borrowed from the GPC as well from other principles. That means that we are fine-tuning what is required for cities to report. Now I'm going to show you, this is a graphic which was taken from the Costa Rican National Methodology for GHG Accounting at national level. And of course, this is the graphic that is showcased on the GPC. As you can see, they are pretty much the same with slight variations. But if you want to compare both of them, they pretty much align 100%. That means that Costa Rica deemed the GPC as a strong and robust framework for reporting and decided to move forward with it. Why? Because it becomes easier and easier to aggregate data if all of the cities within their country start to develop. So the cities fit the national inventory at some point, and they can contrast both ways, from top down and bottom up. So this is a very important practice that needs to be addressed by several governments around the world. So which cities have used the GPC at this point? We have a small sample here of mega, mid, and small size cities. Auckland in the US, New York, San Francisco. In Africa, we have Johannesburg in South Africa, Wellington in New Zealand, Kampala in Uganda, Saskatoon in Canada, Adelaide in Australia, London, Rio de Janeiro, Centeno in Argentina, San Antonio Areco in Argentina, Mendoza in Argentina, Istanbul in Turkey. This does not mean that these cities have not developed the inventories using their national methodology. For instance, in France, cities use the bilan carbon methodology, but there are some international initiatives that required at some point GPC, so cities adapted their inventory in their own methodology to the GPC. For instance, we're aware that London has inventories using the PAS 2070, but they also have one in GPC. So this does not create clashes. No, it actually helps to communicate at the international level, and is not mandatory at national level. So we are just trying to create a horizontal way for comparison. So what are the advantages of using one simplified and one protocol for all of the cities? Well, it's a process for data aggregation at vertical level from subnational to national. It's a process for data aggregation at international level. If you want to do horizontal comparison, either with other cities within your own country or with cities of your same size in different countries, in different continents, you are adding apples to apples and pears to pears. Enhances the transparency, for instance, does not leave empty cell. If you have a cell where you don't have the data, you can use an annotation key, which I'm going to explain later on. So that means that we know why the data is not there, not just that the cell is empty, but why is it empty. Allows the share of experiences, same methods throughout all of the cities, same sectors and subsectors. Is internationally recognized with global focus instead of national or regional focus. Allows the development of specific sectors, subsectors, and gases based on geographical scope and induced data. And is has widely available resources in several languages. Also, it is important to mention that it was developed by city networks and cities. C40 and ICLEI, with the support of WRI, work with public consultation with cities and practitioners to define what will be the best way to measure GHG emissions at urban level. So this is a protocol that was created from cities for cities. What are the advantages? The GPC has a dedicated training program certification system, which is the City Climate Planner program, which offers training, a 3-day training, and a certification, as well as an ID, a license ID for practitioners who wish either to develop a GHG inventory, to further train other professionals in GHG inventory using the GPC, or doing the verification and review for GHG inventory, identification of data for assessing targets, identification of data for assessing financial implications, so forth and so on. So this is a fully dedicated system. No? It's replicable, 100% compatible with the IPCC 1996 guidelines, allows many methodologies for all sectors and subsectors, is on constant enhancement, and it's expected that a new version will be launched by 2019 in order to align with the new assessment report for the IPCC. It is adopted by some national and subnational programs, like I mentioned before, adopted by some global initiatives like the Compact of Mayors and UrbanLets. It's mandatory and encouraged, for instance, by city networks like C40 and ICLEI. It's readily available to be reported in platforms which work with cities, for instance, for the Climate Registry and CDP cities, and has on and offline available tools. Now, a quick example, what do we do with the data that we receive here at ICLEI? This is a small sample. The first graphic here is an average on how the inventory looks. GPC inventories, we have many inventories, but GPC not as much. We have around 1,000 cities reporting, and we have around 200 or 300 GPC-based inventories. This is a general overview, and here we have a sample of how the same sectors look in Europe. As you can see, they have a slight variation from the general overview. Here's in Latin America, where you can see the emissions comes a little bit higher from landfills, and here's in Asia, where the chunk for stationary takes a bigger chunk within the scope. No? So this is the type of analysis that we do with the data that we receive. So we can define trends and what are the needs of different cities. And of course, this is fully aligned on the type of projects that these regions are developing. As I mentioned before, we also have the use of notation keys whenever you have data that you have not found or you are not able to report, and you just don't leave an empty cell. You use a notation key. The notation key included elsewhere when you cannot disaggregate data from one subsector, non-estimated, when you have not been able to find data or it is insignificant, not occurring when it's not occurring at all, and confidential when you don't want to, of course, showcase this data due to legal constraints. An example of this could be, I don't know, a military base, for instance, that can be confidential. So we also analyze this, how the regions use the notation keys here in Asia. As you can see, a lot of cities use a lot of included elsewhere. As you can see, it is like blue. That means that they need more methodologies and more help to disaggregate data from sector to subsector. Not estimated, that means that either they don't have data or that is insignificant and not occurring. So this is in Asia. Now let's see in other regions of the world. In Europe, as you can see, they do estimate a lot, but they cannot disaggregate either. One example of disaggregation could be maybe disaggregation of electric automobiles to be included in the transportation sector. They cannot disaggregate from stationary because, I don't know, if you have a car, you charge it at home and it comes under the bill or under the electricity demand for this particular building or house, and you cannot disaggregate particularly this car for being included on the transportation. So of course this happens a lot here. In North America, a lot of things are not happening, not occurring, but they also have a different way of using the notation keys in Oceania as well. So we analyze all of this and we see who needs what, no? Data for disaggregation, or maybe more data available for developing projects, so forth and so on. WRI has been working on this, and they have recently launched a database for cities in some countries, particularly with the support of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. In South America, the scenario is different. As you can see, a lot of things are not happening there because they are simply just not happening, not occurring. There is a lot of this notation key. So this is the type of analysis that we do. So what is the feedback from the users? Of course, one small feedback here is the city of Copenhagen, which recognized that their calculator was no longer effective, and they decided for piloting the GPC standard for basic category in 2015, because it's a better formulated emissions accounting scheme and includes all emissions and can allow comparison with other cities within Europe and around the world. So what is new? 2 years ago, the Compact of Mayors, which was a global initiative, got together with the European Covenant of Mayors, and they decided to start working on a new common reporting framework, which will take cover of the demands of GPC demanded GPC requirements, which of course does not clash. The GPC will keep on existing, and any inventory which is developed using the GPC can cover all of the requirements of the new common reporting framework that has been published in consultation with cities as well. No? This new reporting framework was launched and borrowed principles from the IPCC, GPC, and the European Covenant of Mayors, the baseline emissions inventory, and the monitoring emissions inventory. It offers different levels of reporting to accommodate different levels of sophistication and commercial activities of the city. It's mostly consistent with the guidelines that borrowed from GPC and the IPCC. That means that if you develop an inventory based on the GPC, you can of course cover all of the requirements from the GCOM reporting principles, although there are small tweaks here and there which allow a little bit more flexibility. Subtle difference, but all major keys components are included. The framework was submitted for public consultation for cities in all regions of the world, and integrates all of the received feedback without jeopardizing quality. So this is another framework, reporting framework, which was developed by cities for cities. So this is the recommended reading. As you can see here, this is all of the literature that we have used at this point. And with this, I finalize my intervention, and we open the floor for questions and comments within the next 10 minutes. So please just let me know. I see one, and I'll unmute, and you can just ask. I see Andrea Costa. I will unmute you. Maybe you can just ask your question. Okay, you wrote it. Okay. So the question is, what do you think are the main knowledge gaps to carry out the inventories, especially in Latin America and medium-sized cities? Okay, what is the main issue there? I am from Latin America. I am from Ecuador, and I have seen that, of course, there is a lack of knowledge. There is a reduced group of people that actually knows how to work with this, and they have not they have not been able to actually transmit this knowledge. And also, the collection data for cities is not very robust, it's not very transparent. There are a lot of leakage, for instance, from electricity, where slums and people that invade some areas, they just steal electricity. So this is very difficult for accounting. So we need much more organized system of data compilation in order to have a much more robust and transparent inventory. We have the technical skills, we have the capacity, but the availability of data is the main issue. I have seen a lot of inventories have used a lot of modeling methodologies. This is quite not accurate. So it is important to have much more data systems. Does this answer your question? Any other question, please just let us know. We will unmute you, or you can just write it down. Okay, so I don't see any questions. Please just let me know. We have like 5 more minutes that I particularly made free for this particular activity, which was the Q&A. Okay, I don't see any further questions. There's one other additional resources for calculating uncertainties. Well, for the calculation of uncertainties, we need to fine tune what are the main constraints to develop this activity. At this point, I recently joined a meeting in Brussels about 2 or 3 weeks ago, where we explore this particular matter, and at this point we are trying to consolidate what are the main methodologies that we can use to calculate uncertainties. We are not very aware of what are the new tools that there are or methodologies for doing this, but we are doing our own research to do this. So, so I believe by next year we will have an answer on this. Okay, leading training programs to train professionals on GHG inventories. Yes, like I mentioned before, there is the City Climate Planner, the City Climate Planner program. You can just look at like this City Climate Planner program, which specializes in a 3-day face-to-face training for GHG inventory specialists at urban level. So this offered you all of the information regarding the GPC, and of course, the offers access to an exam. When approved, it will grant a certification and a professional ID certifying that you can, of course, develop a GPC inventory, review a GPC inventory, and interpret a GPC inventory. And of course, if you wish later on to be an associate trainer, to do this type of trainer. I will just put my last slide here. Here are my contacts. If you wish more information about this, please just let me know. We have another question from Andrea Costa. How to link the inventories of cities with the possibility of participating in carbon markets and incorporate business sectors? This is a very good question. Actually, at this moment, we are currently including this type of increase within our own programs. And I have seen a very good example of this was the city of Bologna in Italy. I talked to them and they mentioned that they generated carbon credits that they trade in exchange for either money or other valuables that they might be interested in. But it is important that within the socialization with the stakeholders to include the private sector, because we cannot decouple decarbonization from economy. It needs to go hand by hand. So the first step you need to do is include the private sector, because they will become more and more interested if this reflects on their finances, on their saving programs for energy, from material demand, so forth and so on. So the first step for socialization is including the private sector. They are the most interested party, which secondly the first party, which is the local authority. So I would also like to recommend. I have this publication, which I use extensively for this training. As you can see here, is the Greenhouse Emission Inventory Resources for some national governments. It's a final report from 2 years ago. It's a very interesting document, and it makes a little bit in-depth comparison that I just did here. As you can see here, takes into account many protocols and guidelines and compare them to the GPC protocol and showcases what are the advantages of each and disadvantages that maybe you can use to apply for your own needs. So please just do a quick internet research and find it. So another question, is there any difference of calculated GHG inventories in cities from developed and developing countries? Yes, there are. Like I mentioned before, cities in developing countries, the data is very scarce at some point, and they use a lot of modeling. And cities on developed countries already, they have a very pre-established system for data collection. So everything is very ordered and the data is very clean and transparent. For developing countries, modeling is of course accepted, but the quality of the inventory per se is not as high as we should expect. So first before starting the inventory, we should check if there is a system in place to collect data in the proper way. Yes, of course. They're asking me if I can suggest literature. Like I mentioned before, you can of course download the GPC, which is available offline. Online it's free, and this file that I'm showing now, the greenhouse gas emission inventory resources for subnational governments, which include all of the methodologies and links if you want to download the guidelines and the protocols that you are seeing here. As you can see here, you have the IPCC, and there's the link. Here you have the GPC, and here's the link. Here you also may find the EAP, which is another standard, and here's the links for all of them. PS 2070, another IPCC methodology, the ISO methodology, and all of them have the link here. You can go there, and then you can download either material for reading or the guidelines themselves. So thank you very much. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, thank you very much for attending, and I'm happy that this has been useful for you. Like I mentioned before, this was addressed to either practitioners that wish to have a little bit more information, or beginners of this. There could be a group that yeah. I see another link for resources as well. Isabel Fernandez from C40 is sharing a website, a link for the resourcecenter.c40.org resources measuring GHG emissions. So you can also go to the C40 website, and you can find the resources there which have best practice case studies. C40 works very well with the GHG inventories based on the GPC protocol, and also tutorials available online. And of course, they do webinars. They do a lot of webinars, so we highly recommend them too. So thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed, and you have further questions, please just contact me. I will show the last slide once again. Here it is. My contact is cesar.carreno@eclay.org. Just let me know if you have any further questions. I will be very happy to help you. Until a further occasion. Thank you.